Kthrack stood before the massive viewing screen in the Confederation Council chambers and watched the swirling colors of distant galaxies dance across its surface. His forearms hung at his sides while his elongated head tilted slightly as he processed the information flowing through his neural implants. The council had summoned him here for what they called an important assignment, but Kthrack suspected it would be another routine observation mission, like the dozens he had completed before. The lead counselor stepped forward with her crystalline body catching the light from the screen. Her voice resonated through the chamber with the musical quality that all Veltar possessed when speaking in formal settings. She explained that a new species had recently joined the galactic community, and the Council needed detailed intelligence about their military capabilities. The species called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue planet in what they named the Sol System. Kthrack felt a flicker of interest as the counselor continued her briefing. The humans had somehow defeated 3 separate Kthrack raiding fleets despite having inferior technology and smaller numbers. Several other species had reported unusual combat behaviors from human forces that defied standard military doctrine. The Council wanted Kthrack to observe these humans during their ongoing conflict with the Kthrack Empire and provide an objective analysis of their true combat potential. The young observer accepted the assignment with confidence bordering on arrogance. He had studied warfare for over 2 centuries and had observed 17 different species in combat situations. Every species followed predictable patterns based on their evolutionary history and technological development. The Veltar themselves had evolved past the need for violence through superior intellect and diplomatic skill. Kthrack assumed the humans would prove to be another primitive species whose early success stemmed from luck rather than genuine tactical ability. 3 days later, Kthrack found himself aboard a small transport ship approaching the human vessel, UNS Freedom. The ship appeared crude compared to Confederation standards, with angular metal plating and visible weapon systems mounted on its hull. He noted how the humans had positioned their armaments for maximum firepower rather than aesthetic appeal, which suggested a practical but unrefined approach to ship design. Captain Jake Morrison greeted Kthrack at the airlock with a firm handshake that the observer found unnecessarily forceful. The human captain stood nearly 2 meters tall with graying hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of many years in command. Morrison wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decoration and carried himself with quiet authority that Kthrack found surprisingly dignified for such a primitive species. The captain introduced his senior staff, including Tactical Officer Lisa Brooks, who possessed sharp green eyes and spoke with precise military bearing. Chief Engineer Ryan Clark appeared younger than the others with calloused hands that suggested he worked directly with machinery rather than simply overseeing automated systems. Colonel Amy Sullivan commanded the ship's marine complement and carried herself with the controlled aggression that Kthrack expected from a military leader. Morrison explained that the Freedom had received orders to patrol the border regions where Kthrack raiders had been attacking human colonies. The captain granted Kthrack full access to observe their operations with the understanding that the observer would not interfere with military activities. The human seemed genuinely curious about Veltar culture and asked several thoughtful questions about Confederation military doctrine. Kthrack settled into his assigned quarters and began documenting his initial observations. The human crew moved with efficiency through their duties, but he noticed they engaged in casual conversation and even laughter during work periods. This behavior contradicted standard military discipline practiced by most species, where soldiers maintained silent focus during operational periods. The observer noted this as evidence of poor training rather than considering alternative explanations. The ship's internal systems operated at acceptable levels, though Kthrack observed numerous manual controls and backup systems that seemed redundant given their computer capabilities. The humans apparently distrusted full automation and insisted on maintaining direct control over critical functions. Their weapon systems relied heavily on kinetic projectiles, rather than the energy weapons favored by more advanced species. During his first meal in the ship's dining area, Kthrack watched the crew interact with easy familiarity that crossed rank boundaries. Senior officers shared tables with junior personnel and engaged in discussions about topics unrelated to their duties. The observer found this lack of rigid hierarchy disturbing and made notes about the potential for command, structure breakdown under stress. That evening, Captain Morrison invited Kthrack to observe bridge operations during the night shift. The human explained that they maintained constant vigilance even in seemingly safe areas because Kthrack raiders often struck without warning. The observer noted the tension in the crew as they monitored sensor readings and communications channels for any sign of enemy activity. As Kthrack prepared for sleep in his quarters, he reflected on his first day among the humans. They seemed competent enough within their limitations but showed none of the advanced tactical thinking or sophisticated weaponry that might explain their reported victories. The observer concluded that previous reports had likely exaggerated human capabilities and expected his assignment to prove relatively straightforward. The ship's gentle vibration through hyperspace lulled Kthrack into the meditative state that served as sleep for his species. Tomorrow would bring his first opportunity to observe human combat operations, and he looked forward to documenting their primitive but perhaps entertaining approach to warfare. The alarm pierced through the ship's quiet hum and sent Kthrack tumbling from his meditation pod. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors as crew members rushed to their stations with practiced urgency. The observer followed the flow of personnel toward the bridge, while his neural implants automatically began recording everything he witnessed for later analysis. Captain Morrison stood at the center of the bridge, receiving reports from his officers with calm efficiency. Lisa Brooks announced that they had received a distress signal from New Haven Colony reporting Kthrack raiders attacking civilian settlements. The tactical display showed 3 enemy ships bombarding the planet's surface, while smaller craft landed troops to capture survivors for the slave markets. Kthrack positioned himself at an observation station and watched the humans prepare for combat. He expected to see the calculated responses typical of civilized warfare, but instead noticed something that puzzled him. The crew members displayed visible anger when Brooks reported civilian casualties. Their faces showed emotions that seemed to interfere with logical decision-making. Morrison ordered the ship to maximum speed toward New Haven, while Colonel Sullivan prepared her Marines for planetary assault. Ryan Clark pushed the engines beyond their rated capacity without waiting for formal authorization. The observer noted these departures from standard procedure as evidence of poor discipline, but the crew seemed to function with surprising coordination. Despite their emotional responses, the UNS Freedom dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system and immediately came under fire from Kthrack patrol ships. Kthrack watched the tactical display as enemy vessels moved to intercept them using standard raider tactics designed to prevent rescue operations. The human response defied every principle of military engagement the observer had studied. Instead of maintaining safe distance and engaging with long-range weapons, Morrison ordered the ship directly toward the enemy formation at maximum speed. Brooks coordinated defensive fire while Clark diverted power from non-essential systems to strengthen shields and engines. The captain seemed determined to break through the Kthrack blockade regardless of the mathematical impossibility of success against superior numbers. The first exchange of weapons fire damaged the Freedom's port shields and knocked out 2 weapon turrets. Kthrack expected the humans to withdraw and call for reinforcements, but Morrison pressed the attack with even greater intensity. The bridge crew worked with desperate efficiency while damage reports flooded in from all sections of the ship. Sullivan launched her Marines and assault shuttles before the ship had even reached the planet. Kthrack watched in disbelief as the human soldiers flew directly through the crossfire between capital ships to reach the surface. Marine Squad leader Danny Martinez led the first wave while his troops prepared for combat drops into active war zones without adequate fire support. The observer focused his attention on the Marine assault and witnessed tactics that violated every principle of sensible warfare. Instead of establishing secure landing zones and advancing methodically, Martinez led his teams in direct attacks against Kthrack positions that held clear advantages in numbers and firepower. The humans seemed to ignore mathematical calculations. That showed their attacks should fail. Corporal Kelly Adams coordinated her squad's advance through enemy fire while carrying wounded civilians to safety. Private Tony Rivera provided covering fire from an exposed position that any reasonable soldier would have abandoned. The Marines displayed what appeared to be suicidal bravery as they pushed deeper into enemy-controlled territory without regard for their own survival. Kthrack documented how humans protected their wounded at enormous tactical cost. When Sergeant Lucas Garcia fell during an assault on a Kthrack stronghold, his squad members immediately moved to recover him despite enemy fire. The observer calculated that abandoning wounded personnel would have allowed the mission to succeed, with fewer casualties, but the humans refused to consider such logical alternatives. The tide of battle shifted when Captain Morrison brought the Freedom into low orbit and began providing direct fire support for the Marines. The ship took severe damage from surface batteries, but maintained position, while Brooks coordinated precision strikes against enemy positions. Clark kept the engines running despite multiple system failures that should have forced emergency shutdown. Procedures. On the planet's surface, Martinez led his Marines in what could only be described as a frontal assault against impossible odds. The Kthrack had fortified positions on high ground with clear fields of fire, but the humans advanced anyway. They moved with coordination that seemed almost telepathic as they covered each other's movements and shared ammunition without formal communication. Kthrack watched Adams and Rivera work together to clear enemy bunkers, using tactics that required perfect timing and absolute trust in their teammates. The Marines advanced through positions that defensive computers calculated as impassable while carrying civilian evacuees to safety zones. Their behavior defied logical explanation, as they repeatedly chose high-risk actions that somehow produced successful outcomes. The battle reached its climax when Martinez led a final assault on the main Kthrack command post. His force had been reduced to less than half strength, but continued attacking with undiminished intensity. The observer noted how wounded Marines continued fighting despite injuries that would incapacitate soldiers from other species. The Kthrack forces finally withdrew when their casualties reached unacceptable levels, but Kthrack realized the raiders had been defeated by tactics rather than superior firepower. The humans had won through methods that appeared completely irrational, yet proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that expected conventional military responses. As the Freedom prepared to depart, New Haven Captain Morrison visited the medical bay to check on wounded crew members. The observer followed and witnessed something that disturbed him more than the battle itself. The humans displayed genuine concern for their injured comrades that went beyond mere unit cohesion or practical considerations. Kthrack returned to his quarters with his neural implants full of data that contradicted everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had achieved victory through methods that defied logical analysis, yet produced undeniable results. The observer began to suspect that his assignment might prove more complex than he had originally anticipated. That night, as the ship traveled through hyperspace toward their next patrol sector, Kthrack reviewed his recordings and tried to understand what he had witnessed. The humans fought with an intensity that seemed to transcend normal military doctrine, but he could not identify the source of their unusual effectiveness. 3 weeks after the New Haven incident, Kthrack found himself aboard the massive human battleship UNS Defiance as part of a relief force racing toward Proxima Station. The research facility had been under siege by Kthrack forces for 18 days, and all communication had been lost for the past 72 hours. Most military analysts assumed the station had already fallen, but General Chris Parker refused to abandon the defenders without confirmation. The observer studied the tactical situation from his position on the bridge command deck. Admiral Katie, Walsh coordinated the relief fleet while Parker planned the ground assault with methodical precision. Proxima Station contained critical research data and housed over 3,000 civilian scientists, along with a small military garrison. The Kthrack had surrounded the facility with overwhelming force that made rescue operations practically impossible. Kthrack noted how the human commanders displayed the same emotional responses he had witnessed during the New Haven battle. When intelligence reports confirmed civilian casualties, Walsh gripped her command chair with white knuckles, while Parker's jaw muscles visibly tightened. The observer documented these reactions as evidence of psychological instability under stress, but noticed that both officers continued making sound tactical decisions despite their emotional states. The relief fleet dropped out of hyperspace at maximum combat distance from Proxima Station and immediately encountered heavy resistance. Kthrack battleships formed defensive screens around the station, while fighter squadrons moved to intercept the approaching human forces. The enemy had clearly prepared for rescue attempts and positioned their ships to prevent any breakthrough toward the besieged facility. Admiral Walsh ordered her ships into attack formation, despite facing odds of nearly 3-1 against enemy forces. The human battleships advanced in tight formation, while their escorts spread out to engage Kthrack fighters. Kthrack watched the tactical display as both fleets maneuvered for advantageous positions in the opening phase of what promised to be a devastating battle. The first exchange of fire lit up space between the opposing fleets as massive energy weapons and missile volleys crossed the void. The UNS Defiance shuddered under enemy fire, while her guns responded with precision strikes against Kthrack capital ships. Bridge officers coordinated defensive systems, while damage control teams rushed to repair critical systems throughout the massive vessel. During the space battle, Kthrack observed pilot Lieutenant Sam Taylor lead his fighter squadron in what appeared to be a suicide attack against enemy positions. The young pilot flew directly through concentrated defensive fire to reach a Kthrack troop transport threatening to escape with captured civilians. Taylor's fighter took severe damage, but he continued his attack run until the enemy ship exploded. The observer recorded how Taylor sacrificed his own escape route to save people he had never met. The pilot could have broken off his attack and survived, but instead chose to ensure the transport's destruction, even though it meant his own fighter would be destroyed by the explosion. Such behavior defied rational explanation, yet proved tactically decisive in preventing enemy reinforcements from escaping. As the space battle raged, Admiral Walsh received a weak transmission from Proxima Station, indicating that defenders were still holding critical sections of the facility. Commander Steve Johnson reported that his garrison had been reduced to less than 200 combat-effective personnel, but they continued resisting Kthrack assault forces. Dr. Nina Foster added that civilian staff were providing support despite having no military training. General Parker immediately ordered assault shuttles to attempt a breakthrough landing on the station's docking bays. The mission required flying through active combat zones, while both fleets exchanged fire around the facility. Kthrack accompanied the assault force to observe human ground combat tactics under extreme conditions. The shuttle flight through the battle zone exposed the observer to the full intensity of human military operations. The pilots flew evasive maneuvers that pushed their craft beyond design specifications, while gunners provided covering fire against enemy fighters. Several shuttles took direct hits but continued toward their target, even with critical systems failing. Inside Proxima Station, Kthrack witnessed defensive fighting that redefined his understanding of military determination. Commander Johnson led his remaining troops in corridor battles against Kthrack assault forces, while Engineer Michelle Gray manually repaired damaged systems under fire. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly as power systems failed, but the defenders continued fighting without regard for their impossible situation. The observer followed Johnson's forces as they conducted a fighting withdrawal toward the station's central core, where civilian personnel had taken shelter. The human soldiers moved wounded comrades, despite the tactical disadvantage, while maintaining coordinated fire against overwhelming enemy numbers. Their behavior suggested they valued individual lives more than strategic objectives. Dr. Foster had organized the civilian scientists into support roles that maximized their contribution to the defense effort. Researcher Alex Wright used his knowledge of station systems to create improvised weapons, while Security Chief Laura Thompson coordinated civilian evacuation routes. The non-military personnel displayed courage that seemed inconsistent with their lack of combat training. The battle reached its crisis point when Kthrack forces breached the station's outer defensive perimeter and began advancing toward the civilian shelters. Kthrack expected the defenders to surrender rather than face certain death in hopeless fighting, but instead witnessed something that challenged his fundamental assumptions about intelligent behavior. Johnson gathered his remaining troops and civilians for what he called a final stand in the station's main laboratory complex. The humans prepared improvised fortifications, while Michelle Gray rigged explosive charges to deny critical research data to enemy forces. Every person in the facility understood they faced overwhelming odds, yet none suggested surrender as a rational alternative. The Observer documented how humans faced certain death with what appeared to be grim satisfaction rather than despair. The soldiers checked their weapons, while civilians prepared to fight with laboratory equipment and maintenance tools. Their behavior suggested they considered dying in combat preferable to survival through surrender. The final assault began when Kthrack forces stormed the laboratory complex with superior numbers and heavy weapons. Kthrack watched human defenders fight from behind overturned research tables, while ammunition ran low and casualties mounted steadily. The battle seemed hopeless until General Parker's assault troops finally broke through enemy lines and reached the besieged facility. The relief force engaged Kthrack assault troops in close quarters combat throughout the station's corridors. Parker led his soldiers in room-to-room fighting that gradually pushed enemy forces back toward their landing craft. The general personally coordinated the evacuation of wounded defenders, while his troops established secure perimeters around civilian shelters. As Proxima Station was finally secured, Kthrack reflected on what he had witnessed during the siege. The humans had held an indefensible position for weeks against impossible odds through sheer determination rather than superior strategy or equipment. Their willingness to fight hopeless battles had somehow produced victory when logical analysis predicted only defeat. That evening aboard the UNS Defiance, the Observer reviewed his recordings while the fleet prepared for departure. The humans celebrated their victory but also mourned their losses with rituals that honored the dead. Kthrack began to understand that human military effectiveness stemmed from psychological factors that his species had never developed through their peaceful evolution. The emergency beacon pierced through the quiet of the ship's communications center like a blade through silk. Kthrack rushed to the bridge of the UNS Freedom, where Captain Morrison stood frozen before the main tactical display. The message from the hospital ship UNS Mercy painted across the screen in stark red letters that announced the worst possible scenario for any military force. Kthrack raiders had captured the medical vessel during a routine evacuation mission near the contested border zones. The hospital ship carried over 400 patients, including wounded soldiers from recent battles and civilian refugees from attacked colonies. Among the captives were Dr. Paul Martinez and his surgical team, along with nurse supervisor Carol Phillips, who had been treating the most critically injured personnel. Morrison's hands clenched into fists as he read the enemy transmission demanding the surrender of 3 human battle groups in exchange for the lives of the medical personnel and patients. The Kthrack commander gave the humans exactly 12 hours to comply before beginning executions of the captured wounded. The tactical computers immediately began calculating response options, but every scenario showed impossible odds against success. Kthrack observed the bridge crew's reaction to this development with growing fascination. Standard military doctrine clearly indicated that sacrificing a small number of non-combat personnel to preserve larger fighting forces represented the logical choice. The hospital ship contained no strategic value, and the prisoners could not significantly impact the overall war effort if lost. Instead of following rational military analysis, Morrison immediately began planning a rescue operation that every computer model declared suicidal. The captain called for volunteers from his crew, while Tactical Officer Lisa Brooks plotted approach routes that might penetrate enemy defenses around the captured vessel. Chief Engineer Ryan Clark started modifications to enhance engine performance beyond safe operational limits. The Observer documented how dozens of crew members volunteered for the rescue mission despite knowing they faced almost certain death. Lieutenant Commander Jason Bell stepped forward to lead the assault team, while Master Sergeant Linda Hayes organized the boarding party. Petty Officer Greg Warren and Specialist Megan Scott requested assignment to the most dangerous positions without any apparent concern for their survival. Morrison assembled his senior staff to review the tactical situation, and Kthrack listened as they discussed options that defied mathematical logic. The Kthrack had positioned the hospital ship at the center of a defensive formation designed specifically to prevent rescue attempts. Enemy fighters patrolled the approaches, while heavy cruisers provided overlapping fields of fire against any attacking force. The captain explained his plan with calm precision that seemed inconsistent with its apparent impossibility. The Freedom would approach the enemy formation at maximum speed while transmitting false surrender negotiations to buy time. Bell's assault team would launch in stealth pods during the distraction, while the ship's main guns targeted enemy sensors to create confusion. Brooks calculated that the plan had less than a 15% chance of success, even under optimal conditions. The assault team would need to penetrate enemy defenses, board the hospital ship, fight through Kthrack security forces, and evacuate over 400 prisoners before reinforcements arrived. The window for extraction would last approximately 8 minutes before enemy forces overwhelmed the rescue operation. Kthrack expected Morrison to abandon such an obviously flawed strategy, but instead watched the captain refine details with his officers. They discussed contingency plans for different failure scenarios while maintaining absolute confidence in their ability to succeed. The Observer began to suspect that humans possessed some form of collective delusion that prevented them from accepting logical limitations. The rescue operation began with the Freedom accelerating toward the enemy formation, while broadcasting surrender negotiations on all frequencies. Morrison personally spoke with the Kthrack commander while his crew prepared for battle stations. The enemy ships maintained their defensive positions but began moving toward more advantageous attack formations as they anticipated the human surrender. Bell launched his assault team in modified cargo pods that appeared as debris on enemy sensors. The stealth approach required precise timing as the pods drifted through the defensive perimeter without active propulsion systems. Each pod carried 6 soldiers equipped with cutting tools and emergency medical supplies for treating wounded prisoners during evacuation. The breakthrough moment came when Brooks executed a sensor jamming attack that temporarily blinded enemy detection systems. The Freedom's main guns fired precisely coordinated strikes that disabled Kthrack communication arrays while the assault pods reached the hospital ship's docking bays. Bell's team breached the hull and began fighting through enemy security forces. With savage efficiency, Kthrack monitored the boarding action through helmet cameras and witnessed human combat behavior that challenged his understanding of warfare itself. Corporal Nick Davis advanced through enemy fire while carrying wounded prisoners to evacuation points. Medic Rachel Turner provided medical treatment under combat conditions, while enemy forces attempted to retake captured sections of the ship. The assault team moved through the hospital ship with coordination that seemed impossible given the chaotic conditions. They located Dr. Martinez and his medical staff while fighting running battles against Kthrack forces throughout the vessel's corridors. Hayes organized defensive positions while Warren and Scott evacuated the most critically wounded patients. First, the Observer recorded how humans prioritized saving others over their own survival during the evacuation. Bell personally remained behind to ensure all prisoners reached the evacuation pods, while enemy reinforcements closed in on his position. The commander fought a desperate rear-guard action that bought precious minutes for the final evacuations. Morrison brought the Freedom alongside the hospital ship, despite concentrated enemy fire that overwhelmed the vessel's defensive shields. The rescue ship took severe damage while maintaining position for prisoner evacuation. Clark kept the engines running through multiple system failures while damage control teams worked frantically to prevent catastrophic power loss. The evacuation reached completion just as Kthrack reinforcements arrived to retake the hospital ship. Bell's assault team fought their way to the evacuation pods while enemy forces attempted to prevent their escape. The final moments of the rescue operation required split-second timing as the Freedom accelerated away from the enemy formation, with fighters in pursuit. Lieutenant Commander Bell survived the mission despite suffering injuries that would have killed most other species. The assault team evacuated all 400 prisoners with minimal casualties while inflicting devastating losses on enemy forces. The rescue succeeded through methods that violated every principle of rational military planning, yet produced undeniable results. As the Freedom jumped to hyperspace with the rescued prisoners, Kthrack struggled to process what he had witnessed. The humans had risked an entire warship and crew to save people who contributed nothing to their military capabilities. They had succeeded in a mission that mathematical analysis declared impossible through sheer determination and coordination. That night in his quarters, the observer reviewed recordings of the rescue operation while trying to understand the implications for his report to the Confederation Council. The humans displayed military capabilities that transcended logical analysis through psychological factors his species had never encountered. Their willingness to sacrifice for abstract concepts like honor and compassion somehow translated into tactical advantages that defied explanation. Dr. Martinez visited Kthrack to thank him for documenting their rescue, and the observer found himself deeply disturbed by the humans' genuine gratitude. The medical officer spoke about his patients, as if their lives possessed value beyond mere statistical calculations. The conversation forced Kthrack to confront the possibility that humans operated according to principles that his advanced civilization had never developed. The rescue of the UNS Mercy represented a turning point in the observer's understanding of human warfare. He began to realize that their military effectiveness stemmed not from superior technology or training, but from psychological characteristics that made them fundamentally different from other species in the galaxy. The massive human fleet assembled at Rally Point Omega represented the largest military force Kthrack had ever witnessed. Over 200 warships hung in perfect formation against the backdrop of space while thousands of support vessels prepared for what Fleet Admiral Peter Kane called the final offensive against the Kthrack homeworld. The observer felt a growing sense of unease as he studied the fleet's composition and realized the humans were planning something unprecedented in galactic warfare. General Susan Clark briefed the assault commanders aboard the flagship UNS Retribution, while Kthrack documented the planning session from his assigned observation post. The human strategy involved a direct attack on the enemy capital world, despite facing defensive forces that outnumbered the assault fleet by a factor of 10 to 1. Every tactical computer in the Confederation would have declared such an operation impossible, yet the humans discussed it with confident determination. The observer had requested assignment to the most dangerous phase of the operation to complete his analysis of human combat capabilities. Admiral Kane granted permission for Kthrack to accompany the orbital assault forces that would spearhead the attack on planetary defenses. The mission required penetrating multiple layers of automated defense systems while engaging enemy fleets in ship-to-ship combat above the homeworld. Colonel Brandon Scott commanded the Orbital Assault Division from his flagship UNS Hammer, while his subordinates coordinated the most complex military operations Kthrack had ever observed. The assault plan required precise timing as waves of attack ships penetrated enemy defenses while ground forces prepared for planetary invasion. Every phase of the operation depended on human units performing tasks that exceeded their theoretical capabilities. The offensive began when Admiral Kane ordered the fleet to jump directly into the Kthrack home system without preliminary reconnaissance. The humans emerged from hyperspace within weapons range of enemy defensive platforms and immediately began engaging targets with devastating firepower. The surprise attack caught enemy forces in defensive positions, but Kthrack commanders quickly adapted and began coordinating counterattacks. Zechithara watched the space battle unfold on tactical displays that showed the full scope of human military capabilities for the first time. Captain Ellen Rodriguez commanded the destroyer UNS Lightning through maneuvers that should have torn her ship apart, but somehow resulted in successful attacks against enemy positions. Her crew performed impossible evasive actions while maintaining accurate fire against multiple targets. The Observer documented how human ships operated beyond their design specifications through crew coordination that defied explanation. Bridge. Teams worked with synchronized precision while damage control parties performed repairs under combat conditions that would incapacitate other species. Ships continued fighting with critical systems destroyed while their crews improvised solutions to maintain combat effectiveness. Colonel Scott led the orbital assault forces in attacks that challenged Zechithara's understanding of physics itself. The assault ships dove through enemy defensive fire while performing maneuvers that should have killed their crews through excessive gravitational forces. Human pilots maintained control through conditions that exceeded their equipment's rated capabilities while coordinating attacks with split-second timing. The breakthrough to planetary orbit revealed the true horror of human warfare capabilities. To the Observer, Major Derek Thompson commanded assault troops that continued fighting after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate soldiers from any other species. Captain Jennifer Walsh coordinated orbital bombardments while her ship took damage that should have forced immediate evacuation of the bridge crew. Zechithara monitored ground force communications as human Marines established landing zones under impossible conditions. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez led her squad through defensive positions that held overwhelming advantages in firepower and numbers. The Marines advanced through enemy fire while carrying wounded comrades and civilian evacuees to safety zones behind their assault lines. The planetary assault demonstrated human combat abilities that transcended logical analysis. Staff Sergeant Kevin Brown coordinated artillery strikes while surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered his unit 50-1. His team maintained communication networks while fighting continuous battles against Kthrack reinforcements, attempting to retake captured positions. The Observer recorded how human forces operated as a unified organism during the most intense phases of combat. Individual units coordinated their actions without formal communication while adapting to changing tactical situations with flexibility that seemed almost telepathic. Soldiers made split-second decisions that supported overall strategic objectives despite having incomplete information about the broader battle. The assault on the planetary capital revealed capabilities that forced Zechithara to question his fundamental assumptions about warfare and intelligent behavior. Human forces penetrated defensive positions that mathematical models declared impregnable through tactics that combined technology with psychological factors the Observer could not quantify. They achieved objectives that should have required forces 10 times their actual size. Admiral Kane coordinated the final phase of the operation from his flagship, while enemy reinforcements arrived from across the Kthrack Empire. The human fleet engaged multiple enemy task forces simultaneously while maintaining support for ground operations on the planet's surface. The complexity of managing such operations should have overwhelmed human command capabilities, yet they maintained perfect coordination throughout the battle. The climactic moment came when Kthrack leadership attempted to negotiate surrender terms while secretly preparing massive counterattacks designed to destroy the human fleet. Kthrack observed how human intelligence officers detected the deception through analysis that combined technical data with psychological insights about enemy behavior patterns. The humans anticipated enemy tactics that other species would have missed. General Clark responded to the enemy deception by launching simultaneous attacks against every major Kthrack military installation in the star system. The operation required coordinating hundreds of independent assault forces while maintaining orbital bombardment schedules that supported ground operations. Human commanders executed the complex plan with precision that exceeded the capabilities of Confederation military computers. The final collapse of Kthrack resistance demonstrated the full scope of human military dominance in ways that terrified the observer. Enemy forces surrendered not because they lacked the capability to continue fighting, but because human psychological warfare had convinced them that further resistance was hopeless. The humans had won through methods that attacked enemy morale as effectively as their physical defenses. As the battle concluded, Kthrack realized he had witnessed warfare that operated according to principles his species had never developed. The humans combined technological capabilities with psychological factors that amplified their effectiveness beyond mathematical calculation. They fought not just to achieve military objectives, but to impose their will on reality itself through sheer determination. The victory celebration aboard the UNS Retribution disturbed the observer more than the combat itself. Human personnel displayed genuine joy at their success while simultaneously mourning losses sustained during the operation. They honored fallen comrades with rituals that suggested individual lives possessed value beyond their contribution to military effectiveness. Admiral Kane personally visited wounded personnel in the medical bays, while General Clark coordinated relief operations for liberated prisoners and captured territory. The human commanders showed concern for enemy civilians that extended beyond mere propaganda considerations. Their behavior suggested they fought for principles rather than simple territorial expansion or resource acquisition. That night, as the fleet prepared for departure from the conquered system, Kthrack compiled his observations while struggling with psychological trauma from witnessing the full extent of human warfare capabilities. The humans had demonstrated military effectiveness that challenged every assumption about combat and intelligent behavior. They possessed capabilities that made them fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. The observer began drafting his preliminary report while knowing that the Confederation Council would struggle to believe his findings. The humans represented a form of warfare that transcended traditional analysis through psychological characteristics that could not be replicated by other species. They had achieved victory through methods that violated every principle of civilized military doctrine, yet proved devastatingly effective against conventional forces. Kthrack sat alone in his quarters aboard the transport ship, carrying him back to Confederation space, while the data crystals containing his complete observations lay spread across his desk like fragments of a shattered worldview. 6 months of witnessing human warfare had fundamentally altered his understanding of military science and intelligent behavior. The young observer who had confidently accepted this assignment no longer existed, and in his place sat a being haunted by knowledge he wished he could forget. The official report required careful wording to convey the magnitude of his discoveries, without triggering panic among Confederation leadership. Kthrack had documented capabilities that challenged every assumption about warfare and civilization itself. The humans possessed military effectiveness that stemmed from psychological characteristics his species had never developed through their peaceful evolution toward advanced technology and diplomatic solutions. He began with statistical analysis that demonstrated human tactical superiority in measurable terms. Their casualty ratios against Kthrack forces exceeded anything achieved by other Confederation members, despite inferior technology and smaller fleet sizes. Human units consistently overcame numerical disadvantages through coordination and determination that defied mathematical modeling. The report documented specific incidents where human forces achieved impossible victories through methods that violated standard military doctrine. The rescue of the UNS Mercy represented tactical excellence that transcended logical analysis, while the assault on Proxima Station demonstrated defensive capabilities that should not have existed. Every engagement revealed new aspects of human warfare that challenged conventional understanding. Kthrack struggled to explain how humans fought not just for territory or resources, but for abstract concepts that seemed to amplify their effectiveness beyond calculation. Their willingness to sacrifice for ideals like honor and compassion translated into tactical advantages that conventional analysis could not predict. They possessed psychological unity that allowed individual units to coordinate as components of a larger organism during combat. The observer detailed how human emotional responses that appeared to indicate poor discipline actually enhanced their military capabilities. Their anger at civilian casualties motivated tactical decisions that proved devastatingly effective against enemies who expected rational responses. Fear for wounded comrades drove rescue operations that succeeded despite impossible odds through sheer determination. The most disturbing aspects of his observations involved human behavior under extreme stress conditions. Soldiers continued fighting with injuries that would incapacitate other species while maintaining perfect coordination with their units. They displayed willingness to die for their comrades that transformed desperate situations into tactical opportunities through psychological factors that defied analysis. Kthrack documented how human commanders made decisions that violated every principle of logical military planning, yet consistently produced successful outcomes. Captain Morrison had risked his entire ship to rescue medical personnel, while Admiral Kane had launched direct attacks against superior forces through strategies that should have resulted in catastrophic defeat. Their success patterns suggested they operated according to principles his species had never encountered. The report included detailed analysis of human technological applications that exceeded theoretical specifications through crew performance rather than superior engineering. Ships operated beyond design limits while maintaining combat effectiveness through coordination that seemed almost telepathic. Human forces achieved tactical objectives that required capabilities their equipment should not have possessed. The psychological impact on enemy forces represented another factor that conventional military analysis had never considered. Kthrack. Units surrendered not because they lacked fighting capability, but because human tactics convinced them that resistance was hopeless. The humans won battles through psychological warfare that attacked enemy morale as effectively as their physical defenses. Kthrack concluded his official report with recommendations for Confederation policy toward humanity that reflected the magnitude of his discoveries. He suggested granting humans unprecedented autonomy within the galactic community while avoiding any actions that might provoke their military response. The report recommended treating humanity as equal partners despite their technological limitations because their warfare capabilities compensated for equipment disadvantages. The classified addendum contained observations that Kthrack knew would disturb Confederation leadership beyond their ability to process rationally. Human warfare represented a fundamental challenge to their understanding of intelligent behavior and military science. The humans possessed capabilities that made them potentially dangerous to any species that failed to understand their true nature. The observer documented his growing realization that humans did not simply fight wars, but transcended them through psychological characteristics that elevated combat into something approaching art. They combined tactical excellence with emotional intensity that produced results that exceeded the sum of their individual capabilities. Their warfare operated according to principles that challenge the foundations of galactic civilization. Kthrack included personal reflections on the psychological trauma he had experienced while witnessing human combat operations. The intensity of their warfare had forced him to confront the limitations of his own species' peaceful evolution. The humans possessed qualities that the Veltar had abandoned in their pursuit of technological advancement and diplomatic sophistication. The final section of his report addressed the broader implications of human military capabilities for galactic society. Other species would need to fundamentally revise their understanding of warfare and conflict resolution to accommodate human psychology. The Confederation faced the challenge of integrating a species whose approach to combat violated every principle of civilized behavior, yet proved undeniably effective. That evening, as his transport approached Confederation space, Kthrack recorded his final personal observations about humanity for his own private files. The humans represented something unprecedented in galactic history, and their presence would force other species to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of strength and civilization itself. The observer reflected on specific individuals who had demonstrated the qualities that made humanity so formidable. Captain Morrison's willingness to risk everything for his crew, while Dr. Martinez's dedication to saving lives under impossible conditions, revealed psychological characteristics that transcended mere military training. They possessed something that could not be taught or replicated through technological advancement. Kthrack realized that his assignment had fundamentally changed his understanding of his own species and their place in the galaxy. The Veltar had achieved peace through superior intellect and diplomatic skill, but had lost something essential in the process. The humans possessed qualities that his people had abandoned and could never recover through conscious effort. Zimi, young observer who had confidently accepted this mission to document primitive human warfare, no longer existed. In his place sat a being who understood that humanity represented a form of evolution that operated according to different principles than those followed by other galactic species. They had developed capabilities that made them fundamentally different from every other intelligent life form in known space. As the transport docked at Confederation headquarters, Kthrack prepared to submit his report, while knowing that its implications would challenge every assumption about warfare and civilization. The humans had shown him that true military strength stemmed not from technology or numerical superiority, but from psychological characteristics that could not be quantified or replicated. The observer requested immediate reassignment to peaceful observation duties while knowing he would never again witness combat without remembering the terrifying beauty of human warfare. The price of understanding their true capabilities was knowledge that would haunt him for the remainder of his existence. He had been sent to witness humans battle and discovered that some things could not be unseen or forgotten. Kthrack sealed his final report in the transport's secure communications system and prepared to face questions from Confederation leadership about discoveries that would reshape their understanding of humanity's place in galactic society. The young species from the small blue planet possessed capabilities that made them unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered.